There's a new species sweeping across the nation. Or that's what it looks like when the same thing shows up from Montana timberlines to Florida pine scrub. Doorbell cams, trail cams, sheriff calls at 2 a.m., prints that aren't bear, eye shine that isn't deer, and a gait that shouldn't be possible on two legs. Tonight, I'm stacking the reports, lining up the maps, and letting you decide if we're looking at a misidentification or something no one's admitted to yet. This happened a few weeks ago in July. I was doing my usual rounds, making sure everyone was staying safe and on the trails. I was near Swan Lake, which is a few miles south of Mammoth Hot Springs. The north side of the lake, in the flats, is where you can see a lot of real-life wilderness play out, like a grizzly bear hunting for a newborn elk. I've seen my share of wildlife around the lake, but that day I saw something that still gives me nightmares. This was the third day that I was patrolling this area. I had yet to see anything out of the ordinary, that is, until I headed south towards Indian Creek campgrounds on Bighorn Pass Trail. Bighorn Pass Trail is a strenuous hike with an incline that seems to never end. It's about a 3-hour hike from Swan Lake to the top of the pass. The trail stretches over 19 miles, through a lot of open meadows and crosses the Gallatin Range. We tell visitors that there's no off-trail travel from May to November because of grizzly bears. It was about 2 in the afternoon when I started to get a weird feeling, like I was being watched, but there was nobody around. I'd hiked this trail dozens of times and knew every turn and every hill. But for some reason, I felt like I was lost. I stopped and looked around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary, no strange sounds. But I couldn't shake this feeling that something was wrong. I decided to radio into the park headquarters and let them know my location, just in case something happened. 700 Charlie, this is Ranger Marshall. I'm on Bighorn Pass Trail near Indian Creek campgrounds. Do you copy? There was no answer. I tried again. Again, there was no answer. 700 Charlie is the Chief Ranger's office. It was odd that I didn't receive a response. I started to feel a sense of dread wash over me. I knew something wasn't right. I decided to turn around and head back towards my vehicle. It was about this time I started feeling a sense of panic. I'd never had a panic attack before this, so I didn't really know what it was like. But I was sweating a lot and could feel my heart in my throat as I was quickly walking back towards my vehicle. It was then that I noticed this awful smell, like something had died. I didn't notice this on the way there. I thought to myself, how in the hell didn't I smell this on the way here? Then I heard a response from the ranger's office. 700 Charlie, copy. We have your location. Is everything all right? I responded, I'm not feeling well and I'm heading back to my vehicle. I think I might be having a panic attack. Something just doesn't feel right. Do you need us to send out another ranger to your location? They answered. I said, no, I'm almost to my vehicle. It was after I responded that I felt like I was in a dream. I was panicked. It smelled awful. The forest around the trail felt surreal, like all the wildlife was gone. I stopped to look around, and the trees just looked different. My boots felt different. I kind of felt like I was outside of my body, watching myself look around. It's really hard to explain. That's when I saw it, about 30 yards ahead on the trail. It just came out from behind the trees. This area is known for grizzlies, but this wasn't a grizzly. It stood about as tall as one, but wasn't as wide. I've seen my fair share of grizzlies in 35 years of being a ranger, and I tell you, this was not a bear. It was still daylight, but I was in a heavily wooded area on the trail. The visibility was good, but it was shaded from the canopy of the trees. I was already feeling panicked, and they say that when you have a panic attack, the fight or flight response kicks in. Well, I froze. I literally couldn't move. I couldn't even grab my radio. In that moment, this massive creature walked out onto the trail, so now I could see it in full view, full visibility. It was a gigantic dog-like creature, something like out of a movie. It was standing on its hind legs, but not like a dog or a wolf would. It was standing like it was supposed to be standing, like it was designed to be upright. It was covered in fur, but its coat wasn't full or thick. It was like spotted and mangy. like a sick dog or something. I couldn't make out what color it was, but it was dark brown or black. It was too hard to tell from the shade from the trees. It had these yellow eyes, kind of like cat eyes, that were staring straight into my soul. That was the most terrifying aspect of this creature. It had a snout, but not something that I've ever seen before. It was slowly moving across the trail while its eyes never left me. I was frozen. I didn't want to move. I couldn't move. It was all I could do to keep standing while this creature was staring at me. The entire encounter happened for a minute, but it felt like an eternity. I glanced down at my radio to grab it, and by the time I looked up, I heard it run off into the woods. Now, I've seen deer run through the woods at amazing speeds, but this was something else. I saw it disappear into the woods faster than I've seen any deer traverse the forest. I had just encountered an alpha predator. I was still standing on the trail. I grabbed my water and took a drink. I could feel the cold water go down my throat. I started walking back towards my vehicle, trying to process what just happened. Was this just in my head because I was having an anxiety attack? Can anxiety attacks make you hallucinate? All of these crazy thoughts were going through my head as I was walking back on the trail. I finally got to my vehicle and sat in the driver's seat. I sat there for a few minutes, just trying to calm down and think rationally about what just happened. I decided to drive back to the ranger station and tell them what had happened. Maybe they could help me make sense of this. I got back to the ranger station and told them everything. They looked at me with this look of disbelief, but I could also see the wheels turning in their heads, like they were trying to decide if they should believe me or not. The thing is, I know what I saw. It was real. It was an animal that I've never seen before, and it wasn't something from my imagination. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what I saw, but I know that it was real. I was camping at Big Meadows in Shenandoah, late September shoulder season. Most of the sites were empty. The sky was clear enough to see the Milky Way. Around 12:45 a.m., I left the tent to walk the edge of the meadow, near the Bird Visitor Center. There's that mowed strip where the grass meets the tree line, and a service road that cuts toward Rapidan. I had a small headlamp and a thermos. No music, just the night sounds, katydids, a few owls. Halfway down the strip, the sounds cut off. Not faded, cut, like someone turned off a switch. I stopped and waited for my eyes to adjust. No wind, no movement in the grass. Then the smell hit. Wet dog and trash like a dumpster after rain. I've smelled bear before. This wasn't that. I took a couple steps back toward the campground and heard it behind me on the service road. 2 steps, pause. 2 steps, pause. Not a trot, not 4 feet. A steady, heavy 2-beat on gravel. I turned the headlamp and hit eyes. Yellow. Low to the ground at first, then it stood up. Straight up from behind a cedar, like it unfolded. Tall, 7 feet easy. Narrow through the chest. Long arms that hung past mid-thigh. Ears pointed. Coat patchy and thin in places like a sick dog. The light washed the color out, but the fur looked dark. It didn't flinch. It didn't blink. It tilted its head like it was trying to line me up. I couldn't decide if I should run or stare it down. I started talking out loud. "Okay, I see you. I'm backing up." My voice sounded small. It took 1 step toward the mowed strip, and I heard the claws tick rock. Clean, sharp sound, not a hoof. I backed into the meadow, keeping the beam on its chest. It paced me along the tree line, always inside the dark, never fully out. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it matched, 40 feet off. The smell rolled in and out with the air, sweet and rotten. The whole meadow felt wrong, like the night didn't want to make a sound until this thing decided we were done. At the road crossing by the wayside, I finally saw it full. It stepped into the open under that sodium light. Not a bear. The legs were wrong, digitigrade, hocks back, weight high. Shoulders forward like a runner, hands not paws. Long fingers curled in. It breathed through its mouth and I could see teeth past the muzzle. Too many, too long. It didn't bear them. They were just there. It took 3 slow steps across the asphalt, never taking its eyes off me, then slipped between 2 pines without touching a branch. No brush crash, no twig snap, just gone. I didn't run. I walked fast, talking the whole way like you do when you're trying to keep yourself together. I'm leaving, you win. My campsite was in Loop B. I got to the bear box and stood there with the headlamp off, trying to listen. For a minute, nothing. Then gravel again, behind the bathhouse. 2 steps, pause, 2 steps, pause. It circled the loop, always just behind the line of trees. A car door slammed a few sites over, and it froze. I could feel it freeze, like the air held its breath with it. Someone flicked on a bathroom light. The shadow it threw across the cinder block wall was too tall. It leaned forward, sniffed, loud, wet, and I heard a low chuff, not a growl, deeper than a dog. Then it moved off toward the meadow. Same 2-beat walk, and the sounds of the night came back in pieces. First one cricket, then another, then everything at once like nothing happened. I sat in the car until 2:30 with the doors locked and the keys in the ignition. I didn't sleep. At first light, I walked the service road with the headlamp off and found the spots where it had stepped. Not prints like a plaster cast, but you could see where the gravel scuffed clean in 2 long ovals, stride longer than mine by a lot. Claw ticks in the dust at the edge of the asphalt. I measured a couple with my boot, 4 feet between them, give or take. The camp host was pouring coffee when I told her. She looked at me, then looked at the meadow and said, "Bears have been active." I said it wasn't a bear. She didn't argue. She just said, "If you're heading out, do it before the traffic on Skyline starts." That was it. I broke camp fast. When I pulled past the wayside, a deer stood in the cut, staring into the trees, ears flat. It didn't run when my car rolled by. It was watching the same place I'd seen that thing vanish. I didn't stop to find out if it came back. I've been in the woods my whole life. I know fox, I know coyote, I know bear. This wasn't any of those. It walked like a man and smelled like a dead dog, and it watched me like it was deciding how the night was going to end. I can still hear that 2-step on gravel when the house gets quiet. I was camped in Owens Valley, California, out in the boulder fields west of Lone Pine. Early October, cold after dark. I'd driven the dirt beyond Movie Road to shoot the Milky Way. No moon, just stars and that black wall of the Sierra. Around 1 a.m., I walked a couple hundred yards from the truck to line up a shot. The ground there is hard-packed with loose stone, round rocks sunk into the dirt, little ankle breakers everywhere. Coyotes had been loud earlier. They shut off all at once. The smell hit, it was sharp and weird, like hot metal and creosote, with a sting of ammonia. It felt like tasting a battery. Gravel moved to my left, one long scrape, then a soft set down, like something big placing its foot carefully. I swung the headlamp and caught eyes. Low at first, then higher because it stood up. It rose from behind a boulder like it hinged open. Tall, 7 feet, maybe a shade over. This one wasn't mangy. The coat looked short and tight, dark with silver guard hairs along the shoulders that lifted when it breathed. One ear was torn and folded, long arms past mid-thigh. It had a tail, thin, not bushy, and it barely moved. It didn't flinch from the light. It stepped out between 2 rock piles, quiet on the stone. The legs were wrong for a bear. Hocks back, weight high. Hands, not paws. Long fingers curled in. The mouth hung slightly open and the teeth looked too long for the muzzle. But it wasn't bearing them, just breathing. I started back toward the truck, keeping the beam on its chest. It paralleled me inside the rocks, 40, 50 feet off. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it matched. The smell came and went on the cold air. Metallic, tar, a bite that made my eyes water. Then it did something I haven't seen before. It bent, picked up 2 fist-sized stones, and clicked them together. 3 slow taps, pause, 2 quick taps. It tilted its head and did it again. Same pattern. It set the stones down like it was done with them and kept pace. At a shallow wash, the ground opens. It crossed into starlight for a second. The silver along its back stood up like a ridge. The tail stayed stiff. No crash, no clatter, just placed steps, toes finding the bare rock. When the truck came into view, it stopped like it hit a line it wouldn't cross. I took 5 more steps. It exhaled, a low, steady push of air, not a growl, more like a big animal clearing its throat. Then it cut sideways into the darker rocks and was gone. No sound. I got in the cab, locked the doors, and sat there with the keys in my hand. After a minute, something clicked softly on the hood. Once, then again. I didn't turn the lights on. I just sat and listened. Nothing after that. At first light, I stepped out to break down the tripod. On the hood, right in front of the driver's side wiper, someone or something had set 3 flat stones in a neat little stack. Not there when I parked. On the ground by the wash, I found 2 long scuffs where something heavy had set down, stride longer than mine, and faint claw nicks in the crust. I've been in the desert plenty. I know bear, coyote, people. This wasn't any of those. It walked like a man, carried that hot metal creosote bite, and clicked rocks in a deliberate pattern, maybe trying to communicate. It stopped when I backed off. I didn't stay for sunrise. I'm not a park ranger, but my father was. He passed away late last year. He would tell me stories of being a park ranger in Mount Rainier. He was a wildlife ranger for over 20 years. I grew up in Graham, Washington, a small town just southeast of Tacoma. My mom is still a teacher at Frontier Middle School. We spent most weekends outdoors hiking and camping. He told me how his job was to protect the wildlife in the park. He also worked educating people about leave no trace principles and how to enjoy the wilderness safely. My father always had a love for nature, and he instilled that in me. I remember going on hikes with him when I was younger and learning all about the different plant and animal species we would encounter. He taught me how to identify animal tracks and scat, and how to properly store food so bears couldn't get to it. I even got to help him set up bear-proof containers in some of the campgrounds. I miss my father dearly, but I'm so grateful for the time that we had together and for all the lessons that he taught me. My father always had some great stories to tell. One of my favorites was when he rescued 2 lost hikers. They had gotten turned around on the Wonderland Trail and ended up in an area of the park that was closed off to visitors. The Wonderland Trail is 93 miles long and goes all the way around Mount Rainier. It's a strenuous hike with a lot of elevation. It goes through lowland forest valleys and into the high alpine areas. Hikers often go beyond their skill level and overestimate what they're capable of. My father found them and got them medical attention right away. They were severely dehydrated and hypothermic. If he hadn't found them when he did, they probably wouldn't have made it through the night. I think about my father often and the legacy that he left behind. He was an amazing man and even a better park ranger. I'm glad there are people like my father out there working to protect our parks and wild places. My dad always made sure that I knew how to stay safe in the wilderness, and his stories always helped drive that point home. Before he passed, he told me of an encounter that he had that absolutely terrified him. Let me just say that if you knew my father, you wouldn't think that anything could terrify the man. He's an ex-Marine, ex-cop, and a park ranger, a real man's man. But this one incident definitely shook him up. He was working in Longmire Meadow one afternoon, checking on a beaver pond that had been built there. As he was walking around the pond, he heard a loud splash behind him. It sounded like a grizzly running through the shallow end of a pond. When he turned around, he could see the water was disturbed and was rippling across the pond, but there was no animal. Longmire Meadow is a pretty open area, so whatever animal splashed the water had to cover a significant amount of ground before disappearing into the woods. He said it was a very odd occurrence. The next day, he was talking to one of the other park rangers, and they told him that 15 years prior, a man had gone missing in that area. His body was never found, but his car was found abandoned near Longmire Meadow. The man was related to one of the park rangers and was a very experienced hiker. He knew better than to go off in the wilderness without letting someone know where he was going. The search party looked for him for weeks, but never found any trace of him. The only thing they found was his car with the keys still in the ignition. My father was a little weirded out after hearing that story, but more curious than anything else. A few days later, he was out in Longmire Meadow again, and this time his senses were on high alert, considering what had happened just a few days ago. He was looking around but saw nothing out of the ordinary, but then he heard twigs snapping, like something heavy was moving through the woods towards him. He turned around and saw a large, dark figure standing near the edge of the woods. It was definitely not a bear, and it wasn't anything that he had ever seen before. The figure was taller than a man and covered in fur. He radioed into the ranger's office for backup with his location. He yelled towards the figure, but it didn't move. At this point, it was about 75 yards from where he was, but the visibility wasn't great. He knew it was too large to be a man, but he couldn't get a good view of its features. It was near the edge of the woods, and there was some brush covering up part of its body. From what he could see, it had very long arms, much longer than a human. The arms hung down past its knees, and that's when he realized that this thing was standing on two legs like a human. But it was definitely not human. He had no idea what he was looking at. He said in that moment, everything was very quiet, like it was only him and this creature that existed. He was terrified, but he had his weapon on him in case anything progressed. He took his eyes off the creature when he heard the backup ranger pull up in his vehicle, and by the time he turned back around, the figure was gone. He didn't know what to make of it, and neither did the other ranger. They both agreed whatever it wasn't something they had ever seen before. My dad was always extra cautious when he had to go out to Longmire Meadow from that day forward, although he never encountered this creature again. Two of his colleagues did the next year. A seasonal park ranger had a similar encounter in Longmire Meadow. However, he watched it run into the woods. The movement and speed at which this creature moved was frightening. 2 years later, another wilderness ranger encountered a strange, dark figure at the edge of the woods near Bench Lake. This is about 7 miles from Longmire Meadow. This ranger was able to get a better look at the creature and described it as being covered in black fur with yellowish eyes. The ranger was pretty shaken up about this encounter and took a few days off. There's a small handful of rangers who have encountered these sightings while my father was working at Mount Rainier. It's something that he never told me until later in his life. I'm not sure why, but it's terrifying to think that these creatures exist. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I've had my encounters with grizzly bears before, and it's pretty terrifying. I've even had one charge at me and my father when we were hiking Rampart Ridge. I wanted to share this story so that people would be aware of the possibility that these creatures exist. Please be careful if you're ever going into the woods, and make sure you let someone know where you're going.